Commish, this is a time of year where hopefully a lot more Canadian football fans pay attention. The old adage was that the season really starts for everybody on Labor Day, and you had enough games and a couple of games on the weekend that didn't disappoint. You have to be pleased where things are right now.
Well, absolutely thrilled would be actually more accurate. And candidly, the beauty is we've had such a good season so far. Look, our viewership is way up. Our over the weekend, our viewership just for Labor Day was up 35% year over year. We had almost 1 million Canadians tune in to the Winnipeg Saskatchewan game on Sunday, which turned out to be, an epic game. We got great young quarterbacks and quarterbacks along the entire experience continuum performing really well. It's just been a phenomenal season for us so far.
So the question has to be asked: what's different about this year than previous years?
Well, John, I mean, I can't point to one single thing, but I'd say, we've been doing the work. We've been doing what we needed to do. We've been doing it now for several years. We've had a good strategy, one that's been incredibly well supported by our board of governors. We've made some real investments in some marketing infrastructure. We're really connecting ourselves to our fans in unique and different ways. I think that's helped us to attract a new generation of fans. One of the most exciting things about our statistics so far this year is that our viewership in the 25 to 54 category is up almost 30%. And that's the demographic that's really attractive to sponsors, and that's the demographic we've always been seeing. So, John, I think we've done a lot of really good work, and the credit goes to the governors first and foremost because they made an investment in our future.
I've seen you quoted as saying that the CFL needs more swagger. You got to beat your chest more often. I think you have the 2 Labor Day weekend games in the West as the product that allows you to do that. How do you do that with those games that were as exciting as any CFL game can be, really?
Yeah, Dave, great question, and I think the answer is just we look at the talent on the field and we push those young men to the forefront because there's some amazing stories. Look, I'll start here in Toronto with Chad Kelly. The way he is playing, he's a remarkable young man. He's performing incredibly well on the field. He's just got an incredible personality. He's exactly, for the Toronto market, he's a real strong force for us. So, Dave, the answer is how do we do it? How do we get that swagger? We take those that have earned the swagger the most, and that's these young stars, and we push them out front and center and celebrate their excellence in our game.
Well, to that subject, then I'm going to tell you about a problem that I've always had with the CFL and every other league for that matter, but perhaps mostly in the CFL for a simple reason, and that's player movement that sees a star leave a team and go to another one, and then around and around and around. And the CFL has had lots of examples of that. The biggest star right now, I think we would agree, is Zach Collaros. Winnipeg's his 4th team. Cody Fajardo of Montreal, 4th team. Vernon Adams of BC, 4th team. Is there a way to create some kind of roster advantage for a team to keep a quarterback or any star player that matter for a certain number of years? And does that bother you?
Well, again, Dave, great question, and I'm happy to report that we've already put in a number of pieces. Look, the last year's long-term collective bargaining agreement with the CFL Players Association took a lot of steps in the right direction to give players more incentive to stay in their markets longer. And an example of that is guaranteed contracts. So when you've been with your current club for a period of time, now you become eligible for a guaranteed contract. That's going to give our teams a chance to really keep their greatest players. And, Dave, interestingly enough, Zach Collaros is a good example. you look at the Bombers and all the success that they've had there. You know, big shout out to Wade Miller and the entire organization, Kyle Walters, Mike O'Shea. But one of the things you'd note about the Bombers is that roster hasn't changed a lot over this stretch of real success. And I think what we're seeing there is a bit of a model, more than a bit of a model emerging for the way it works. And of course, now it's not just on the field in Winnipeg; it's the connection those players have with the fans. They're sold out for this weekend's game. I talked to Wade Miller yesterday. He believes they're on track for 2 more sellouts in the weeks to come. They've got Toronto coming in a few weeks' time. They believe that's going to be a sellout. So, Dave, you're absolutely right. Look, roster stability is critical, but we did, thanks to our bargaining team, thanks to the CFL Player Association, we put some pieces in place now that gives us more tools from which to make sure that we can keep our stars in the city that they're playing in. But I couldn't agree with you more. It's really important.
How it's funny, I asked this question of the commissioner of the National Hockey League the last time he was on. How many ramifications were there of COVID, and where you are now? Is it hard to imagine what you had to go through and with the season cancellation and what you went through with COVID?
Well, John, sometimes I shudder when I think about what that felt like, and and what it was like, not just for our league, but what it was like for all of us. It was a very difficult time, and mostly the problem, and I'm sure you all recall it well. Those days in March and April and May and June, you really in 2020, you had no idea where the bottom was. Like it was like we were just in a free fall, and when was all of this going to end? Look, the good news is that we stuck together. Again, I got to go back to the governors. Our governors, as most owners in pro sports, took a beating. They, financially, it was very difficult on them, and our governors really committed to the future of the league. Interestingly enough, for us, our guys not only committed to funding us through that period, and funding their teams, but they made investments in the league's future. And that goes back to your first question. Why is it so good now? In part because they really paid the piper, at a really difficult time. Look, I look back on it now, some lessons learned for sure, a lot of hard work during that time. But boy, does it feel good to be where we are today. Perhaps that's why. If I feel like when I get up in the morning, I've got reason for a gigantic smile. Maybe it's because you just been through that battle, and now we're on the other side and seeing so many good things happen for the league.
Well, when the last time you were on, your 3 biggest markets were out of the playoffs. Your 3 biggest markets were your biggest disappointments: Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And the tables have turned, quite frankly, at this point, in all 3. How has that happened? And the new ownership in at least 2 of them, and maybe a new reinvested ownership in MLSE and what they think of the Argos. That really has changed a lot for you, hasn't it?
It sure has. John, I'm going to say that when we write the story, when the historians write the story on the CFL and the 2023 chapter, I think it's going to start with Pierre-Karl Palado. I think when Pierre-Karl reached out to me and said, I want to buy the Alouettes, and just the whole way he approached the transaction was so spectacular. The way he dealt with he dealt with the negotiations, with our bargaining and negotiating team, the professionalism, but everywhere along the way, every time he talked, he just talked about wanting to own it, wanting to bring that local ownership to the Alouettes. So that's what's happened in Montreal is nothing short of spectacular. I'll go to the other side of the country. What Amar Doman is doing in BC, and there is not just a vibe inside of BC Place. There's a vibe in that entire community. The Lions are back, and people are talking about the Lions. And I was going through the airport, and I would say in previous iterations, I might walk through Vancouver Airport and never get stopped once by a fan. I got stopped 5 times yesterday by people just saying, "Hey, what are you in town for? Is there a game on?" Like there's definitely a vibe in Vancouver, again, to Amar Doman, to Dwayne Vinot, to that organization. But really, one of the things I'm really excited about is in Toronto. Really excited about the energy. Bill Manning deserves a real shout out. Chris Schufelt deserves a real shout out. Michael Clements, of course, who everyone's always knows how hard Mike works. But there's something special going on inside of the Argos organization within MLSE. I'm so excited for them. But John, you're right. Like that was the first question I got asked is what's going on with your major markets? And now our three biggest markets are perhaps one of our best stories. So it's very gratifying.